Hello, everyone. Welcome. I want to welcome you on behalf of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research and the International Association of Yiddish Clubs, or the IAYC, for today's program. My name is Julia, and I am the Program Associate at YIVO. For those of you who do not know YIVO, we are a very special place for celebration, contemplation, and exploration of Yiddish and Eastern European Jewish culture. We are located in New York City, where our library and archive contains over 24 million documents and 400,000 books, which are used by researchers from all around the world. We also have lots of classes on Yiddish language and culture, exhibitions, and public programs just like this one, where we aim to bridge the worlds of Jewish culture and our vast library and archival holdings. So thank you so much for joining us for this community read today. We will be putting a bunch of links in the chat so you can learn more both about YIVO and the IAYC, as well as stay up to date on our future public programs. And now I would like to turn it over to my co-president of the International Association of Yiddish Clubs, Barbara Goldstein. You're muted, Barbara.
Thank you. Seid begrüßt und Baruch haba in der beshutfesdike leyenung. The IAYC began in 1992 as an association of grassroots Yiddish Klubben, Schmoozgruppen, and Leyenkreisen. Over the decades, with support and leadership from Finkel, the IAYC has been successful at informing Yiddish groups about Yiddish activities, providing them with people contacts, organizing in-person conferences in different locations, and importantly, providing them with teaching and performing materials. For many years, Troy Katz-Blacher-Handler, who was a teacher, a poet, a consummate Yiddishist, and a member of the board of the IAYC, chose and edited those materials. They were mailed twice a year to IAYC clubs. In the spring of 2023, beloved Troy passed away. It is appropriate that this program is dedicated to her memory. Koved ihr Ondenk. Before Shashka Reisel Uni speaks to Refoyl Finkel, who lead today's program, I would like to thank a number of people. First, hartstikken dank to YIVO for graciously and generously hosting this new Yiddish culture event. To the Associate Director of Public Programs at YIVO, Julia Rothkopf. Last month was elected co-president of the IAYC. Julia is knowledgeable, skillful, beautiful, and vivacious, and she is by far the youngest IAYC president that has ever served. To Alex Weiser, YIVO's Director of Public Programs, who, when he was co-president, so ably and successfully steered the IAYC. To Dr. Refoyl Finkel for being a master teacher. And there's a universe of meaning in those words. You'll find out. For providing the online text of Sholem Aleichem story, Ven ikh bin Roytshild, and for enabling us readers to see certain words appear in English translation just by clicking a mouse or by pressing our phone screens with our fingers. To Dr. Murray Batt, for your excellent online glossary, which lists words in Yiddish oysyes in transliteration and in English translation. To Asya Eisenkot for your announcement of this event in elegant Yiddish prose. To Michael Moore for your wizardry with online announcements. To Steve Lasky for the link to your Museum of Yiddish Theater, which displays information about the cast of a 1939 theatrical adaptation of Ven ikh bin Roytshild. To Dr. Yosef Weissman for your steadfast guidance and generosity. To Alexander Weissman for your extraordinary talent and generosity. To Shashka Reisel Uni for presenting in Yiddish the 9th IAYC Lifetime Achievement Award to honoree Dr. Refoyl Finkel. To the IAYC Board of Directors, members of the Advisory Board, especially Dorothy Martin, Janice Makovsky, and Helen Smolkin, and the clubs of the IAYC for their dedication and support. Shreich. And now Shashka.
Du hast den Text. Zu beweisen, geht das. ein bisschen Hacker, sei es okay. Danke. Refoyl Finkel hat verdient ein Doktorat von Stanford Universität in 1976 in dem Feld von Robotik. Ist gewesen auf der Fakultät von der Universität von Wisconsin Medicine von 1976 bis 1987. Ist gewesen ein Professor von Computerei-Wissenschaft bis der Universität bei der Universität von Kentucky in Lexington seit 1987. Seine Forschung nimmt daran eine Myriad von hochtechnischen Unionen, reinnehmendig novatorische Arbeit mit verschiedenen Operiersystemen und Logikformulierungen. Seine Karriere auftun nehmen daran Entwicklung von einer Sachmaschine für Computersystementwicklung allein. Meiste technisch zu der Zeilen da Hand, aber lo mir poschet sagen, als ein Teil von sei, haben zu tun mit der Logik von Spieltheorie und Linguistik. Hat herausgegeben schon mehr wie 50 Artikeln in professionelle rezensierte Journalen und hat geschrieben 2 Lernbücher, sei für College, sei für Nachgraduierstudium. Dr. Finkel hat gekriegt etliche Prämies für Lernen und ist ein aktiver Mitglied von verschiedenen professionellen Computerei- und Linguistik-Organisations. Ist auf der Exekutive von dem altweltlichen Verband von Jiddisch-Clubben. Nicht kickendig auf dem, legt aber rein die Keuches und entwickeln Computerei-Technologie für Yiddish. Wegen was ihr wird bald hören mehr. Dr. Finkel ist aufgewachsen in Chicago, wie hat gehört, noch ein bisschen Jiddisch von Zeit zu Zeit, typisch für Amerikaner Jiden von Insador. Gedeiht sie nicht verlieren sein Yiddish-Rieche, hat angehoben studieren Yiddish in College, zuerst bei der Universität von Chicago, der nachdem wie Graduierstudent bei Stanford. Als bei der Saat Base konzentrieren sich mit seinem Computerwissenschaft-Studium. Redet bloß Jiddisch mit seinen 2 Kindern und ist regelmäßig und aktiver Beteiligter in der jährlichen Jiddischwoche von der Jugendruforganisation. Nun, lassen wir schon reden wegen Refoyls Schöpferischkeit und Tirches für Jiddisch Computerei. Die Regime ist ganz lang von seinen Schaffungen. Ich kann jetzt bei Kitzer beschreiben nur etliche. Koidem versteht sich, als Ding geht breitherzig heraus, umsetzt für alle Yiddishisten, Studenten, Allemen. Da befindet sich sein Webseite von Jiddisch Computerei Marschieren, was wir können nutzen. Und Julia wird schreiben dem Adress in dem Schmierskestel später. Julia is going to write this URL in the chat box in just a little bit after this. Nur ein kürzer reinführt zu etliche von die Geschmacke Surprisen, was wir können dort finden. Refoyls Jiddisch Schreibmaschine zusammen mit Osley Control für Jiddisch, versteht sich. Mit der Schreibmaschine kann man gering verwandeln, Lomoschel Transliteration zu jiddische oysyes und verkehrt. Es ist also so nützlich für Projekte groß und klein. Noch, Stutschkows Oyzer, was man kann sichern in ein wenig elektronisch. Versteht sich, als der Oyzer Bier ist ein Synonym-Bier, was ist so viel mit was ist so viel mehr effektiv zu nutzen, wenn man kann sichern elektronisch, anstatt ein hin und her mit der Hand, mit dem Index. Noch ein elektronischer Exemplar von größten Wörterbuch von der jiddischen Sprache. Alle 4 Bände. Nu, für jeder eine, wenn man heibt sich an studieren Jiddisch, lacht man, macht man häusig, weil die alle 4 herausgegebene Bände nehmen rein bloß Wörter, was heiben sich an mit dem Os Aleph. Bald, nachdem lernt man sich, als wenn man sieht ein Verb, kann man sich in dem Verb mit allerlei Präfixen, was heiben sich an mit dem Aleph. Lemoschel. Wegen dem Verb nehmen kann man sich ausnehmen, abnehmen, wegnehmen und so weiter. Aber was tut man, wenn es nicht kein Verb? Und das Wort ist so selten oder altmodisch, als es befindet sich nicht in die 2 wunderliche moderne Wörterbücher. Englisch bis Yiddish von Gittel Schechter und Herschel Glaser und Yiddish-Englisch von Chaim Bochner und Sholem Aleichem. Nützt Refoyls Mittel da zu sichern alle Fallen, wie das Wort befindet sich ergens in die Definition von anderen Wörtern. Und die erste einzige 4 Bände von einem größeren Wörterbuch. Oft kann man haben die Meinung. Noch eine Meile ist als Refoyls elektronische Version, stellt sie die Meinungen von allen Roshataivas. Lemoschel, anstatt Fe, Vov, Vov, Lamed, steht das Volksviertel. Das heißt, als man darf nicht blättern durch die 4 Blätter mit 2 Rubriken, das heißt 8 Rubriken, Regimes, Kürzungen und Roshataivas, genutzt in einem Wörterbuch, kadai zu dekodieren die Information. Das ist so great. Noch sind voran a Sache mehr oysyes dort auf Refoyls Regime. Lemoschel, andere elektronische Wörterbücher durchzusichern, Sammlungen jiddische Texten und Lieder, was man kann studieren und viele spezielle Schriften, was man kann reinstellen in einen Computer, sei Mac, sei Fenster, sei Linux und so weiter. Lemoschel, eine Schrift, was seht aus, so wie es ist handgeschrieben. Und man darf verstehen, als Schriften für Ivrit arbeiten nicht für YIVO Kalal Yiddish, weil man hat lemoschel nicht kein Pasuk in den 2 Jiden und noch Probleme. Aber der orchesterste, größte Projekt ist, als hat digitalisiert die ganze Werk von Sholem Aleichem mit OCR, das ist Optical Character Recognition, also wie man kann sichern dem ganzen Text und noch mehr, hat gehorvet zu beidem Ausleih zum YIVO Kalal Ausleih zu machen es geringer für Studenten und andere heimseitige Yiddishisten zu lernen. Se kommt der Fall, Raphael Finkel ein riesigen Jaschakoyach. Es ist ein Kuvert zu sein in seinen Kreisen. Wollen wir machen die Mikrofonen und geben ihm ein großen Bravo.
Hurra!
Hurra, hurra.
Bravo!
Bravo, bravo,
Bravo!
יישר
Amazing!
כוח.
Sing done.
amazing.
יישר כוח.
Bravo.
Shkoyach Shishkele.
Und jetzt, das ist ein Zertifikat, was ist geschickt geworden zu Refoyl. Ich hoffe, ja, man kann sehen die ganze Sache. Es ist handgemacht von Alexander Weissman, der allweltliche Verband von Jiddischklubben in Anerkennung von seiner Übergegebenheit zu der jiddischen Kultur und Sprache präsentiert Refoyl Finkel die 2024 lebenslange der Greichprämie. Uha.
Uha.
Und noch this is a Matona, this is a Bild Orchid, a Molerei von Alexander Weissman, soll ich schein mit die, ja, so. Und jetzt?
Herzlichen Dank, Shashka. Okay. So, Refoyl, I believe you're on.
Morgen, good Abend, sollt nicht sein. Hello, everybody. Good to have you all here. It's like some of the enormous classes I used to teach at the university, but it's all individual, so that's very nice. So, before I begin, I want to quote from the Shulchan Aruch, as everyone always does at the beginning of a talk, right? It is impermissible for a student to teach Torah when his rabbi is right there, because the rabbi should be teaching it instead. I want to recognize that some of the people here have been my teachers. I want to mention Mayor David and Mina Grauer, Ellen Latovsky, Sheshka Reisel herself, Elliot Gertel, David Katz, and there might be others as well whose names I missed. So thank you all for teaching me, and also I learned from all of my students. And so to begin, I'm going to share my screen and get rid of a few things first. All right. Sound and this one. All right, now, did it happen yet? Not quite. There it is. And let me get rid of a few other things. Okay, can you see this? I accept it must be yes. All right, so the website, and in the chat you can find, again, the pointer to it, has several different parts, and you can look at whatever part you want. You can, for example, if you're not interested in the Yiddish letters, you can click there. If you're not interested in the translation, you can click there, and you're left only with a transliteration. Now, I'm going to only be using the original, so I'm going to hide other things here. The way I hope to do this, then, is I will read a paragraph, stopping frequently to talk about individual pieces of that. And at the end of each paragraph, there will be a chance for all of you to raise your hand and ask a question if there's something that is not yet clear or you want to ask about. So that's the method I hope to follow. So, Ven ikh bin Roytshild. If I were Rothschild, a monologue from a Melamed. Now, I'm not going to translate this word for word. You've got the translation in front of you if you want it, but I will be pointing out a few of the interesting points here. Why Rothschild? In Sholem Aleichem work, he often uses either Rothschild or Brodsky to talk about a rich Jewish person. So this would be Laser Brodsky. Rothschild is a whole family of financiers, but there was one particular Brodsky who was important in the area around Kiev. That was Lazar or Lazar, Eliezer Brodsky. And usually he uses Brodsky as his exemplar, but now this one is Rothschild. A Kastrilivka Melamed. What's this Kastrilivka? This is an invented shtetl. The name comes from Kasriel. It's a fictional shtetl near Yechupetz, which is his fictional name for Kiev. So when you hear the word Yechupetz, think Kiev. When you hear the word Kastrilivka, think Kastrilivka. The word Kastrilivka comes from the Yiddish, actually. Kasrilik is translated sometimes as an optimistic pauper, but it actually comes farther back from a Hebrew name, Kasriel. God is my crown. And how you get from Kasriel to Kasrilik, I'm not sure. Sometimes that happened, that someone's name stuck as a personal type. So he's a Melamed in Kastrilivka. So he's a Kastrilivka Melamed. Now, what then is a Melamed? as you're certainly aware, Yiddish takes a lot of Semitic-based words. Melamed is one of them. And a melamed is not just a teacher. A melamed is a teacher of young children, particularly the first experience that kids have with schooling, maybe when they're 5 years old and they're first going to cheder. And the job of the melamed is to teach generally the aleph base and just a little bit of reading, also known as a dardikam melamed. And they would address the melamed as Rebbe. And so when you hear the word Rebbe, it doesn't always mean rabbi. Often it refers to the melamed. But because the melamed is referred to as Rebbe, therefore his wife is referred to as a Rebbetzin. Even though she's not the wife of a rabbi, she is a Rebbetzin. The term Rebbetzin applies to the wife of a melamed. Right, now I'll read a little bit. Ven ikh bin Roytshild hat sich zuletzt der Kasrilefcher melamed einmal in a Donnerstück. Bis der Rebbetzin hat ihm gemeint auf Shabbos und hat nicht gehabt. Oh, there's so many things I want to say about this. Firstly, some grammar. Then, it's cognate to the English word when, but it means if, contrary to fact. If it were the case, although it is not the case. So if I were, not when I be, but if I were. Okay, I guess I'll stop at the word saloz a little bit. The tse prefix usually adds a meaning to the base word of in various directions or apart. Lozen is to release himself in various directions. Well, he let himself go, you might say in English. He broke out into a thought or into a monologue. Einmal in a Donnerstück, once on a Thursday. Now, what's special about Thursday? Well, you can see from the rest of the sentence. Beis der Rebbetzin, his wife, hat ihm gemont auf Shabbos, was demanding from him for Shabbos, and hat nicht gehabt, and he didn't have. In other words, Thursday is the day when you start getting prepared for Shabbos. Friday night is the one meal of the week that even a poor person wants to make as fancy as possible, and it costs money. And so that's why we have that it's on a Thursday that he's asking. And I maybe I won't sing it for you, but there's a song, Amolas gewen a Yid, hat gehat a Yidne. Once there was a fellow and he had a wife, and she kept asking him for money for Shabbos. And he says, how can I do that? I don't have. So nemen af Shabbos, for the purpose of Shabbos. Now, that was just a parenthetical thing. Here's the quote mark. Often in the older texts, even in English, you'll find a dash introducing a direct quote. So this is like an open quote mark. Sometimes it's used as a closed quote mark, like the one here. Oi, wenn ich soll sein Rothschild, trefft, was ich tu. Now, here you'll notice that some of these words, as I go over them, turn red. That's just a sign that if you have the text in front of you and it turns red, you may click on it, and it will give you an English, very quick summary of what it means. And then it goes back, okay, by a second click. So, Reish is Chochma, first of all. All right, I have to stop on that. How does Reish is Chochma come to mean first of all? Well, Reish is Chochma is a direct quotation from Psalms, from Psalm 111, Pasuk 10. Reish is Chochma Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. This is a very short pasuk, which was taught early on to the cheder children. That what are the first things you teach in Hebrew? Well, you might teach the Shema, and you would teach that particular verse. Reish is Chochma Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. And then it comes into Yiddish just as an expression meaning first of all. It no longer means the beginning of wisdom. It just means first of all. And if you're going to be using a Hebraic expression, and the Melamed would have taught his children Reish is Chochma, then you'll see that when you say second of all, we'll have the hashenis, also using a Hebraic term. Right. Reishis Chochma, Firech Ein, a minig. As a vibe, soll Tomid haben bei sich a Dreier. So what's a Dreier? A little three, a Dreier. That a wife should always have a Dreier. Well, it's a 3 kopek coin or a 3 ruble coin. It's a little threer. I translate it here as a 3 ruble coin, but that'll be an enormous amount of money. But if you want to know what a 3 ruble coin looks like, that's what it looked like. I found a picture of a 3 ruble coin. It doesn't have the word 3 on it anywhere that I can see, but I'm pretty sure that that's what it was. Bichtei, sie soll versporen dullen a spodek. Dullen a spodek. An interesting example. A spodek is a hat. Dullen a spodek, to dull a hat, or to turn a hat sometimes, that means to be annoying. Als kommt der Donnerstag und es ist nicht auf Shabbos. V'hashenis, kauf ich ois, die Shabbos-dike kapotte. Kauf ich ois, die Shabbos-dike kapotte. Oder nein, dem Weibs ketzene Brunnes. Lass sie aufhören picken in Kopperei. So, if I were Rothschild, I would make sure that she always had money. And secondly, I would purchase her I would purchase myself a Shabbos-dike kapotte, or I would get for my wife a ketzenim burness. Now, what is this ketzenim? A burness is a burnous. It's a head covering made of cat fur. That may be. The translation that you have in front of you, which I didn't do, calls it squirrel fur. I'm not quite sure if they ever actually used cat fur, but maybe Angora. Lozi aufhören picken in Kopperein. Picken in Kopperein is like dullen a spodek, again, to be annoying. As is ihr kalt. Ich kaufe weg die dosige Stube im Ganzen. Mit alle 3 Chadoren. Mit der Kammer. Mit der Speisarnie. Mit dem Keller. Mit dem Beide. Mit dem Hackel, Backel, Bickel, Fleckel. So he's going to sell off the entire very small house. It's got 3 little rooms. It's got a kammer, which is another side small room. Speisarnie is like where you keep the food. There is a keller. Okay, there's a basement. A boydom, there is an attic. So maybe it looks something like this. Maybe not. I couldn't find a picture of this particular house where the Kasrelov Kermalamed lived. This is most likely not in very good shape, and his was most likely in better shape than that, but certainly quite poor. Now, what's this Hakel, Bakel, Mikkel, Fleckel? Well, you might recognize Hakol, Bakol, Mikol from the Birkas Hamazon, from the blessing after meals. And it's referring to 3 psukim in Genesis, where each of our ancestors used the word kol. Hakol, maybe that's Abraham, Bakol, maybe that was Yitzchak, Mikol, maybe it was Yaakov. I don't remember who said what. But this then becomes part of the Birkas Hamazon, the grace after meals, thanking God for providing us with everything. And Fleckel? Well, this is just a humorous addition to Hakel, Bakel, Mikkel, Fleckel, to say everything in the world. So I would sell off everything. Lo sie nicht sagen, als es ihr eng, na der weg 2 Chadoren. Koch dir, wasch dir, brock dir, und lass mich zur Ruhe. Ich soll können knallen mit meinen Talmidim, mit der reinem Kopf. Brocken, by the way, kind of an unusual word except for cooking. It means to break, but it most likely is something like to reduce long noodles into smaller noodles, something like that. And knellen is a verb that's only used, as far as I know, for teaching children. Man knelt mit Talmidim. Knellen mit meine Talmidim. So I've got also a picture that I found somewhere of what the Malamed might have looked like and what his the students might have looked like. They're quite young. There's not really enough books to go around. The books are in terrible shape. And they're all sitting at the table, and he's trying to point out, this is an aleph, perhaps. Can you please repeat after me, aleph? Well, we've finished one paragraph. So it's time now, if anyone wants to raise a hand, you will be called upon, and then you can open your microphone and ask a question. I'm open for questions.
All right, so I see Basi has a question. Let's start there. And please unmute yourself.
Hi, Raphael, and all. The word then, as you said earlier, doesn't mean when, but if. But how would we know that in general context?
That's a good question. It can mean either when, or if. At the beginning of well, you can maybe tell by the present tense verb. Ven ikh bin Rothschild would be when I was, perhaps. I guess this is one of those complexities of language. You can't always tell what a word means when you first see it. You've got to see what its context is. But I guess that's the best answer I can give you, standing on one foot, that it's the present tense bin here, which is the...
We're not sure. I guess we'll just call you. Dunk.
Okay, so next I see Sora Rivka. You would like to unmute?
Yeah, Dunk. Yeah, I have a similar question. As soon as I started reading this, it came to mind. How do I know when to use ven versus oib?
Yeah, oib doesn't have the same characteristic of it is not the case. Oib is more like a simple if. And then is introducing something which is an if, but it certainly is not currently the case. So if the sun rises tomorrow, or if the sun rose today, well, but it did. So oib is more of a simple if, then is more of a contrary to fact.
Thank you, Dunk.
All right, so we'll take only 3 questions per paragraph. So I see that we have more than 3 questions for this paragraph. So just keep your hand raised and we'll answer them after the next paragraph. So the final question for this paragraph, let's go to Janice.
Actually, just a comment. So really your then is more like when it's going to be a subjunctive situation, right?
Although Yiddish doesn't have a subjunctive mood.
Right, but that gives
In
you
English,
the feeling of it.
If I were, and
yeah.
if I,
Yeah.
yes.
The other thing I was going to say actually before that was that that addition of the fleckle, this is kind of like what we have in English. I'm sure other languages it's called a reduplication. It's like okie dokie. And so you just throw on another thing that sort of has the flow of either the rhyme or maybe there's a vowel change, and it just picks up on what was there before.
That makes sense to me. And while I'm on this line, I just wanted to point out this word nadia, take for yourself. Na is one of the 2 words that I know of in Yiddish, which only appears, they only appear in the imperative. Nadia, take for yourself. The other one is sha. So it's be quiet, sha. Soll sein sha, it can be a noun, but as a verb, it's only in the imperative. It's kind of weird. Okay, on to the next paragraph. So again, he's all if I were able to do this. Nishtak in daiges parnasa, madarf nicht klären, wo nimmt men auf Shabbos? Mechaya nefashis. So wo nimmt men? Nemen is a great verb. It means to take, but it can also mean to derive, for something to arise. And so nemen auf Shabbos is the typical expression to acquire something for the purpose of being able to enjoy Shabbos. Typically, it means food, but it can also mean such things as candles. And I wanted also to talk about this hyphen, Handaigas Parnasa. Why a hyphen? The rules here are not completely fixed, but generally speaking, if you have an expression which is multiple word and it's all Hebraic, and someone is not actually speaking a sentence in Hebrew, but using this as an expression in a Yiddish sentence, then it gets hyphenated. I always turned to Neborsky's dictionary to be sure of whether or not to put in a hyphen, because I will trust what Neborsky says as to whether a hyphen belongs or doesn't belong. The rule, if you've got a multi-syllabic combined word and none of it is Hebraic, then the rule is much easier to memorize. If together there's only 4 syllables or fewer, you don't hyphenate. If there's 3 or fewer. If there's 4 or more, then you do put in a hyphen. Maybe we'll find an example, maybe not, I don't remember. Here, by the way, is based on Medrash, again, hyphenated for that same reason as before. Okay. Mechaya nefashis, another good example of a hyphenated, mechaya nefashis, a real pleasure. Die Tächter alle Chasene gemacht, arop a horeb von die Plätzes. Chasene machen, as opposed to chasene haben. In English, the word to marry is confusing, just like the word ven, I guess, in Yiddish. In English, the rabbi married me. Now, what does that mean? That means the rabbi conducted the ceremony, not that the rabbi became my husband or my wife, right? So in Yiddish, it's easier. Machen chasene is to marry off. Chasene haben is to become married. So die Tächter alle chasene gemacht. This is an important thing in that society because it's expensive to marry off a daughter because you're expected to provide a dowry. That's one of the problems with Tevye der Milchiker, that he has 7 daughters and no sons, and so he is expected then to provide for all of them. And that's one of the problems that he worries about. Arop, an ol von kop, arop a horb von plätzes. A horb is a hunch, as in a hunchback. So it's like a monkey off the back. Was fehlt mir? What is lacking me? I've got a cousin who grew up in an English-speaking, Yiddish-speaking house, and her English isn't perfect, and she would say, that's all that's missing me. Was fehlt mir? What is lacking me? Heb ich mir an herumgucken a bissel auf der Stadt. I want to point out here that his first concern is his wife or himself, his family, his house. And then he moves his gaze outward a little bit. And this is, I draw this back all the way back to the Parsha Achrei Mos. And you'll wonder, what is he talking about? The Parsha Achrei Mos in the Torah talks, we read it on Yom Kippur. It talks about the various sacrifices that the Kohen Gadol performs during the Day of Atonement. And his first sacrifice is on his own behalf, and then on behalf of all the Kohanim, and then on behalf of Klal Yisrael. This is a very typical way of thinking, not just the Jewish way of thinking, but I like to think that it's a Jewish way of thinking, that your first obligation is to yourself, and then your household, and then to your community, and then to the wider world. And you'll see that that's exactly the form, the pattern that this will take. So, Arum gucken a bissel auf der Stadt. Das erste bin ich menader an neuem Dach auf ein alten Bes Medrash. Lass aufhören Kappen auf den Kopf, bis die Jiden davenen. I want to stop on bin ich menader. Menader it means to donate, and it's a periphrastic verb is what the grammarians call this in Yiddish. Periphrastic verbs are taken from Hebrew. They usually are in a form with a mem, although not always, but typically. In the present tense, it takes a form of bin. Is menader, mir seinen menader. In the past tense, it's a little bit strange. In the past tense, it's going to be ich hab menader gewen. So it uses haben, but it uses gewen. And if you're used to having haben, ich hab das gehabt, not ich hab das gewen, but haben, ich hab menader gewen is the way you put it, and in that word order. So that's a periphrastic verb. Okay, the base medrash, there are various terms for the synagogue. This one refers to the place of study, but it's also the synagogue. L'zufaren kapen auf den Kopf, b'shas jeden davening. And lahavdil, das merchetz. Why lahavdil? Lahavdil, not in the same breath, because he's talking about two things which are not to be compared. The base medrash and the merchetz. Now, a merchetz, again, it's a Hebraic origin. It's the bathhouse, the bod. And the bathhouse is a place where it's every community, every shtetl had at least one of these, and it was an important place, but it's considered less clean as a place because that's where people go to wash themselves. And therefore, it's not in the same breath to mention merchetz when you've just mentioned Beis HaMedrash. Warum nicht heint morgen? Es wird dort müssen sein ein Unglück, chas v'sholem. Tomer, fällt das Oys akkurat b'shas noshim boden sich. Again, chas v'sholem, Hebraic hyphenated. Tomer is a great word. We don't have an exact equivalent in modern English. We used to have the word lest, L-E-S-T. We don't use it anymore, but that's what's going on here. Or if you're a Latin speaker, it's like ne, N-E. Lest there should fall, it should happen. Akkurat b'shas, noshim boden sich. Now, notice he's using b'shas and base. He doesn't use ven. So the word ven, meaning when, he's always avoiding and using a Hebraic construct instead. And he's using noshim instead of froyen. I don't know why he chooses to say noshim instead of froyen. Good. Questions related to this paragraph or the previous one?
All right, let's start with Louisa. Feel free to unmute yourself. Let's go to Bill.
I have a question on the social place of the Melamed. When I first started reading these things, I assumed that this was a highly revered figure in the community, but is that necessarily so?
No. The Melamed is someone who has only enough learning to teach the small kids. And he most likely is incompetent, unable to do any handicrafts. And therefore, it's a fairly low stature position. It's not the lowest. The water carrier, for example, would be lower. The balagola, the wagon driver, would be lower, because at least he's learned to some extent. But he gets very little money. He's paid by the parents of the kids on a weekly or a monthly basis if he can manage to collect, which he can't always manage. So he's not supported by the community at large. His salary comes in bits and pieces. It's called Rebbe from the students' parents.
Great, perfect. Okay, I see that Louisa's back, so let's go to Louisa.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I did have a comment, sort of a summary comment about the question on the first paragraph about Ven ikh bin Rothschild, and I agree with this. Of course, I know that ven and oyb can be interchangeable when talking about conditions, but because of the verb in being, I wanted to ask you, but you said it right at the beginning, that you would also say oyb or ven ikh bin geven, right? You said that right at the beginning, and it does give me the impression that it since it doesn't have oyb ikh bin geven, that it really is a subjunctive form that obviously in Yiddish does not get to be marked by the verb in the sense of something that I wish it will happen, but I'm not sure whether it will happen, because that's what a subjunctive is all about, or when it happens, if it happens.
Right, that's exactly right.
Thank you. I wanted your comment on that because it gives me that impression.
Wonderful. So I think for our final question of this paragraph, let's go to David. Free to unmute. David Allen, free to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had unmuted myself. This is my first time, and I just wanted to ask how I get the English at the same time, or can I get the English in advance to study it so that I'm up to speed when you're doing the Yiddish?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll send a link in the chat.
Thank you so much.
No problem. So let's go to Marna, and that'll be our final question of this paragraph.
Link, you'll be able to click in order to
Thanks.
the translation.
Yes.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, so I'm interested in the use of das Merchets, and he seems concerned particularly about the roof falling in on the women who are bathing, which makes me wonder whether this is a mikveh, but it's not. But he just calls it a bathhouse, not specifically a mikveh.
Yeah, my guess is that it is also a mikveh. That different times of week, for example, Friday afternoon, it would be reserved for men. But in the evenings, especially after dark, it would be reserved for women who had just finished their period of waiting after menstruation to go to the mikveh. And so most likely it'd still be called the merchatz.
But he's not afraid that the roof might fall in on the men.
Well, that wouldn't be such a scandal to have naked men. That's not nice, but naked women, now that's not nice at all.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let me continue then. Und wie bald das Bod, muss man schon das hektisch avade zu warfen und an niederstellen a biker cholem. All right, what's a hektisch? It comes actually, it changes its meaning over time. Literally, it's the holy place, hakodesh, hektish. But it was, again, one of the communal places in every shtetl where people wandering from town to town, needing a place to stay, could do so. The homeless, in general, always could find a roof over their head by going to the hektish. It was supported by the community. It was not a nice place, but it's what the community could afford. And it comes then to mean a place which is a shambles, a mess, a terrible place. And so if your child's room is very messy, you can say, clean up this hektish. So man muss schon das hektish avadet zu werfen. Und an niederstellen a biker cholem. Biker cholem in modern Israel refers to the insurance for the ill. It's a medical thing, and here it is as well. Literally, the biker cholem is visiting the sick, and there's a mitzvah of visiting the sick. But here he's using it as a place where the sick can go. Aber take was a biker cholem heist, mit Bettlich, mit der Doktor, mit Refuas, mit Yichlich, alle Tag. Yichlich, that's yoich is chicken soup or soup in general, but nourishing chicken soup. That's the first line of cure. Yichlich, alle Tag for the chaloim, the ill. Wie es wird sich in leitische Stadt. Leitische Stadt. Light means people. That lightish means upstanding, like in the reasonable towns, not like in our little shtetl of Kasilivka, but in the leitische Stadt, they've got a real biker cholem. They know how to properly treat the ill. Let me just look at my own notes, see if I'm missing anything here. Right. Und a Moshe skenim, shtalachavek. Now, Moshe skenim, I want to stop on that word. Moshev, a place of residence, skenim, old folk. So this is a place where the elderly, especially those who no longer have any family, can go to be cared for. And not every community had a Moshe skenim. But what I really want to point out, besides the fact that it's Hebraic and has a hyphen, is how it's pronounced. It looks like it should be zakenim. And in Hebrew, in fact, which avoids consonant clusters, it is zakenim, moshav zakenim. But Yiddish doesn't mind consonant clusters, so it's skenim. But then the z, which is voiced, becomes unvoiced in the presence of that k right after it. So it's not as if it's pronounced zk, it's pronounced sk, skanim, which causes me a difficulty in my word list, in my dictionary. Do I put it under z or under s? I decided to put it under z because that's how people are more likely to find it. But it is pronounced skanim, Moshe skanim. And maybe I'll take this opportunity to give a little bit of advice. If you know how to pronounce something in Hebrew, how do you figure out its Yiddish pronunciation? So start with the word moshav. You first, moshav, right? You first move the accent one step earlier, moshav. Then you look at the vowels and you notice that under the shin is actually a kametz, not a pasach. So it's moshav, moshav. Then, having done that, that's fine if that was the accented syllable. Here it wasn't. All the unaccented syllables, you reduce their quality from an or an I just to an You're now at moshav, moshav, just an moshav. And finally, the accented syllable. Yiddish does not like the sound O. That's kind of weird. It's a common sound, isn't it? You don't find it in Yiddish. If it's O, change it to Oi. Now, if you're a Litvak, you're speaking Northern Yiddish, you'll change it to A. I'll use Klal Yiddish. It becomes Oi. Moishev. Moishev. The other vowels stay as they are, but Moishev. And so we can look at Zikanim, put the accent earlier, Zikanim, change the E to an Skanim, Skanim. And then, of course, there's that unvoicing, which I mentioned. So you get Moishev Skanim. Good. A Moishev Skanim shalach weg alta Jiden leumdim. Sollen sich nicht walgeren in Besametrisch bei der Chruba. Walgern, roll about in Besametrisch by der Chruba. A Chruba, as you can tell from the fact that it starts with a hey, reish, is a Slavic word. It means the oven. And on a cold night, where should the old folk go if they need a nice warm place? They go to the Beis Medrash. And why there? Well, these are Yidden Lomdim. These are scholars, or people who've been studying all their life. It's like a second home for them. So they go over to the Beis Medrash and they sit near the oven. And they're, in fact, a series of tales taught behind the oven. I think Besheva Singer has a series of stories behind the oven. And it was a gathering place, the Churba. And ich stelle weg a chevra malbish yisaymin. Malbish yisaymin, clothing the orphans. Arme Kinder soll nicht herumgehen, ich bet über eure Covid, mit die Pupkes in Dreußen. Ich bet über eure Covid. Excuse my French, is what that means. Well, literally, I ask for forgiveness for your honor. Mit die Pupkes in Dreußen. In other words, the poor children might not have a shirt, and therefore they're running up and down the streets with the pupkas and Dreußen, and that's considered not very nice. And so even mentioning that, I have to überbetten dein Covid, euer Covid. And a chevra gemilas chasodim, free loan society. This was quite common. My understanding is that in the Pale of Settlement, around the years, say 1850 to 1900, fully a fourth of the Jewish population was living on the support of the other 3/4. They required continual charity to support them. And a Gemilas Chasadim, or a Gemilas Chesed, is a fund which is a tax, not a tax-free, it is an interest-free loan society. As if the Saya Malamed, Saya Bal Malacha, Saya Soicher, Afila, Saya Soicher Afila, Zol Versporen, Solen Prozent. You wouldn't have to pay interest. Nicht dürfen vermaschkenen das Hemd von dem Leib. Vermaschkenen is to pawn. Or Chevra Hachnasis Kala. These were also fairly common. Some would be a charity fund for providing clothing for brides. And it would be on loan. It wouldn't be a gift, but it would be on loan so that we have a poor woman who's getting married, doesn't have the money to get dressed up, no money for jewelry or nice clothes. So you go to the Hachnosas Kala and you borrow from there. As wo ergens an eure Mädel nebach, ad Erwachsene, soll man sie auskleiden, wie es gehört zu sein, und Chassene machen. Und noch Kedoima Azelcha Chevres, Kedoima Azelcha. Sholem Aleichem was doing this kind of combination. A Hebrew word followed immediately by a Yiddish word that means about the same thing. Kedoima, like, similar. Azelcha, similar. Kedoima Azelcha Chevres, Firichain, by uns, in Kasrilivka. So notice the heavy use of Hebrew. Well, he's a Melamed. So his level of Hebrew, his register, is a fairly lomdish, a fairly learned register of Hebrew. All right, are there questions here?
All right, let's see first. Okay, so seems like Harvey. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm good at this point. It was about something beforehand, so we're good.
All right, great. So let's go to Nigar.
Yes, thank you. I had a quick comment on the Ketzeneburnus that was in the first paragraph. There is an expression in Russian when you say about a fur that is a cheap fur, you say that it is a cat fur. So I think that it is in this meaning that is used here. Ketzeneburnus, it is a burnus made of a cheap fur, like a cat fur. It's a bit a humorous description, I would say.
Thank you. That adds a lot to what he's talking about, because he was talking about yes, exactly. That works well there. I'll have to maybe I'll even put a footnote in my version of this. You call it cat fur just to mean cheap.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right, and then we'll go to Rachel.
Hi, Refoyl. Good to learn with you again. Yeah. My question: you were saying that Menada Zain is to give. In my native Hebrew mind, Menada Zain is. No, not. I'm sorry, not Menada. Neder is a pledge. Menada given is I pledged a donation. You said to
Donate.
that lenader is to donate, but in my Hebrew mind it's to pledge. And am I wrong or am I right?
We're both right. Yeah, it can mean to pledge, but I think what he means here is not only to pledge, but then to fulfill the pledge. So
I think it comes from the word vow, maybe. Nadar.
Vow nadar neder is like it's a.
It's in kol nidre, but it here it means not only I will pledge to give, but pledge money in order to put up a new roof, but it's actually to donate. So I translate it as menadev instead of menader, and maybe that's a reasonable correction. I will pledge money for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have time for one more question for this paragraph. If anyone wants to raise their virtual hand. Oh, I see Louisa. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Refoyl, for the explanation that you gave us about the phonological adaptation of Hebrew into Yiddish. Can you expand a little more on what is the origin of that? For example, the dislike of the O, as you were saying before, those sounds that sort of follow, I guess, a pattern.
I wish I could. I do not know the history of the phonology of Yiddish, and there might be experts who can address that, but I'm not one of them. So I can't explain why it should be that Yiddish doesn't like the sound O, and why the accent comes a little earlier. But this is the Ashkenazic pattern that it likes, well, if you look at modern Polish has a very strict rule that the accent always comes on the penultimate, the syllable before the end. Modern Hebrew, and Hebrew in general, likes to put the accent on the last syllable. So this might be an influence from Slavic languages to prefer an earlier point of accent. That explains why it's not Moshav, but Moshav. It does not explain why it's Moishev instead of Moshev. That one I don't really know how to explain. Well, let me continue then to there's a picture of a Hachnosis Kala, a Kala. Anyway, it's the best picture I could find for this purpose. Nor was is Shaykh epistavke nor by uns in Kasvilovka. So now he's turning his view farther out. Umetum, wo es gefinnen sich, nor achenu b'nei Yisrael. That's 3 words and they're all hyphenated. Pirichain, azelche chevres, umetum, auf der ganze Welt. Und bechtei, soll sich führen mit der Seder, die es gehört zu sein, trefft. Was tue ich? Now, you notice he's addressing someone. This isn't the first time where he's addressing the person directly here in the imperative. Guess. He uses the formal trefft. He's just wondering to himself, but he's also addressing perhaps a non-existent partner in his conversation. Machich uf alle chevres. Machich af alle chevres ein chevre. A groisa. A tzedaka gedoyle chevre. Was geht Achtung auf alle chevres. Auf alle Jiden. Was heißt, auf dem Klal Yisrael. Als Jiden soll umetum haben Parnasse und leben in Achtes und sollen sitzen in die Yeshivas und lernen. Now, from this particular monologue was derived the Fiddler on the Roof, If I Were a Rich Man. And the sweetest thing of all, you remember, was to be able to sit in the yeshiva and study. And so people should be able to live in harmony and just be able to sit in the yeshivas and study and not to have to worry about parnasa and not to have other things on their mind. What do you do in your free time? Crossword puzzles? Nah, you study Mishnah. What do you study? Well, Chumash, mit Rashi, mit Gemara, so the first text, commentary on the first text, commentary on commentary, if you want, mit Tosfos, mit Maharsha, mit alle Sheva Chachomis. Okay, I've got to go back here. Tosfos, the additionals. These are in the generation of the grandchildren of Rashi. So Rashi himself, that's Shlomo Yitzchaki. His dates are 1040 to 1105. And he wrote the standard commentary on the Talmud, on the Gemara. And mostly what he was trying to do is explain things so that they would be clear. His grandkids and the people of that generation, in particular Yaakov ben Meir, that's also known as Rabbeinu Tam, his years are 1100 to 1171, wrote commentary also on the Talmud, but they were trying to find places which were tough. This seems to be in conflict with that, and the way we get around it is such and so. So they're a much more difficult part of the commentary to read and to understand, although they're typically printed on the same page. In the center of the Talmud page, you'll find the text, and in the inner column, you'll find Rashi, and in the outer column, you'll find the Tosfos. And now, Maharsha, that's Morenu, Harenu, Rabbeinu, Shin Aleph. And so, who is this fellow? This Shmuel Eliezer Halevi Elis. His dates are 1555 to 1631. No, I didn't know that. I had to look it up. A later commentary. Mitala Sheva Chachmas, with all the 7 wisdoms. What are the 7 wisdoms? Well, this is the combination of the quadrivium and the trivium. We have the word trivial. Trivial means you only study 3 subjects instead of the proper 4 subjects, the quadrivium. Well, I have a list of all the seven arts, the septem artes liberales. It's astronomy, arithmetic, geometry, music, and then the 3 other later ones are rhetoric, grammar, and logic. So anyway, that's the Sheva Chachmas. Mit alle shivim lashon, 70 languages, in all the 70 languages. Now, of course, in the world, there are thousands of languages, perhaps on the order of 4,000, of which half of them are in great danger. But why do you get 70 languages? This comes not from the Bible, but it comes from the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, where the languages were dispersed. And then the Midrash on that suggests that this is the origin of the 70 languages of the peoples of the world. And auf alle Yeshivas soll sein ein Yeshiva a größer, a Yiddische Akademia, in der Vilna gewöhnlich. In Vilna, of course. Why in Vilna? Of course, because that was the center of Jewish learning. The people around Kastrilivka, around Kiev, looked up to the Jews in Lithuania as real scholars. Not necessarily nice people, but great scholars. And so in Vilna. Was von dorten sollen herausgehen die größte Leuten und Chachomim in der Welt. Und als Ding soll sein umsetzt, al cheshbon hagvir, at the account of the rich man. In other words, I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. Auf mein Keschen. Und als Ding soll sich führen mit der Seder und mit der Plan. Es soll nicht sein, kein gib mir na der Chaplat. Und alle sollen im Sinnen haben, nur Teufels Aklau. General welfare. Questions on this?
And so feel free to raise your virtual hand. If you have a question, and we will call on you. I don't see any right now.
Fine, we can move on. So let me move on. Bekteim man soll kennen tragen auf den Kopf dem Klau. Tragen auf den Kopf means to be aware of. Was darf man? Darf man bewahren dem Prat. So Klau and Prat. This is an expression right from the Talmud, Klal ufrat, the general and the particular. And in order to understand the general, you've got to be careful about also all the particulars. You don't want to lose the sight of the forest for the trees. No, it's actually you don't want to lose sight of the trees because of the forest. Und mit was kann man bewahren in dem Prat? Gewöhnlich mit Parnasse. Warum Parnasse das ist der rechte Iker. Und Parnasse kann nicht sein kein Achtes. Über ein Stückel Brot, mit Steins gesagt, ist einer dem anderen Jahre Lachayim. Okay, so mit Steins gesagt, as it were. Now, how do you get as it were out of Mishteins gesagt? People have wondered about this. And years ago, there was a mailing list called Mendele, and people would ask questions and try to answer them. And I found on Mendele a discussion of Mishteins gesagt. It's the etymology is not at all transparent. It might be from soll es nicht auf mir nor auf dem Stein gesagt. Let it be said not on me, but on this stone. That's just a guess, but it means as it were, Mishteins gesagt. This is a great example of a malo fugitive. A fellow named Matasov has a book, a Jewish blessings and curses, where he introduces a great terminology. A malo fugitive is an expression which is meant to ward off malo, to ward off fugitive malo, to ward off evil. So so originally this was a malo fugitive, and now it just means as it were. Yored l'chayev that means it's to harass. In fact, that term comes right from the Talmud. I found it using Sefaria. Sefaria is a great tool for finding the exact wording of things where you have a feeling they might come from Talmud. And it means to harass. It comes from, if you're interested, Tractate Yoma 75a. Kapel, that means capable. Yenem koilim, samen, hengen. Now, this word samen is really hard because it's a combination of Hebraic and Germanic with no way of telling which is which. Older printings will put an apostrophe between the two, so you see that there's something happening there. Modern spelling doesn't, so it looks like it's the word smen. Doesn't exist, it's samen, to poison. Afile de Sine Israel, that should be hyphenated. Unsere Homens, von der ganzen Welt, meint ihr. Was haben sie zu uns? Gar nicht. Nur, sie lieb Parnasse. Sie sollen haben Parnasse, here's another contrary to fact conditional. If they should have. Wenn sie sollen haben Parnasse, you could put in the wenn, but you can leave it out. Wenn sie sollen haben Parnasse, wollten sie gora so schlecht nicht gewinnen. Parnasse bringt zu Kina. Kina bringt zu Sina. Often you'll find, by the way, that this expression that Kina and Sina are used in the same sentence. Maybe because they rhyme. Und davon, Rahman al-Islam, nimmt sich alle Zores auf der Welt. Now, Rahman al-Islam, that's an expression, a Talmudic expression. You can tell the fact that it's Aramaic, that it's not biblical. Rahmana means the merciful one. In Aramaic, a prefix of la, unlike Hebrew, is not the infinitive. It's a should form. So may the merciful one save us. The nun at the end is us. So Rahman al-Islam, may the merciful one save us. In other words, it's like God forbid. Und davon, Rahman al-Islam, nehmen sich, that's again nehmen sich, arise. Alle Zores auf der Welt, alle Unglücken, nicht nur gedacht. Mit aller Redifes, mit aller Hagiges, mit aller Retziches und mit aller Milchums. Nicht nur gedacht. It shouldn't be thought of here. That's another mellow fugitive expression. Yiddish has plenty of them. Any questions?
Feel free to raise your virtual hand. I don't see any yet.
Okay, good. Well, great. It's all clear.
I see two, actually. Let's go to Judy.
I'm sorry, but I don't know what alla hiragas, alla ritzachis, and I know more.
Yeah, hariga is murder.
Okay.
And ritzach is murder. These are two different words in Hebrew for murder. You do see the word harganen in Yiddish, to beat up. So all events of beating up, and ritzichas is murder again, but it's evil action and milchamos.
And redifus?
Hold on, I'll get the word for it. Sometimes when I'm in Yiddish, it's hard to come up with the right English word.
Oppression. Persecution. Redifus is persecution.
Rodef.
Or oppression.
Yeah.
Pursuit.
Yeah, it comes from pursuit, but here it means a persecution. Right. So here's a picture of what's coming up. Oy, the milchamas. So what are the milchamas that he's worried about? Well, in that area of the world, there was the Russo-Turkish War from 1877 to 1878. There was the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. And the Jewish community was involved in it because of the preziv, the fact that the kids were often taken away to be soldiers. They were drafted. And so the wars were on everyone's mind. Das ist der Gora Schchita, war der Welt, slaughter. Ven ikh bin Rothschild, mach ich oys milchamas, aber takel lechaluten oys. Lechaluten, absolutely, oys. And oys here it means out, but it means away with. That ihr fragen, wer soll? Nur mit Geld. Daheine, that's a Talmudic expression, namely, ich will es euch geben zu verstehen, mit der Seichel. Lamoshel, zwei Meluches zerampern sich über eine Nahrigkeit dort, ein Stück leer. Was ist wert, das schmeckt Tabake. It's worth only a smell of snuff. There are other expressions which refer to something which is almost completely worthless. This is the most common one, a schmeckt Tabak. But you'll also see, and I looked some of these up because I really like this concept. You also have an oisgeblosen egg, a blown out egg, or a tzibala, a retich, a shishka. A shishka is a pine cone. It's vert a shishka. It's as valuable as a pine cone. So the stickle earth is vert a schmeckt Tabaka. Territoria heißt es bei sie. Die Meluche sagt, dass die Territorie ist ihre Territorie, und die Meluche sagt, nein, es ist mein Territorium. Misheches Yimebereshes heißt es. hat Gott beschaffen, hat das Stück gelehrt, von ihr Covid wegen. Von ihr Covid wegen. You see, this is not completely productive, but you'll find a lot of versions of it. Von meinetwegen, von deinetwegen, von seinertwegen, for my sake, for your sake, for his sake, for ihr Covid wegen, for the sake of its honor. Kommt zu gehen a Dritte und sagt, ihr seid beide Behemoths, fools. Die Territorie is allemens Territorie, a Reshus Harabim heißt es. Reshus Harabim. This is an expression from the Talmud, from Tractate Shabbos. It's one of the categories of location where a lot of people can walk past, and it is a public area. So Reshus Harabim, literally communal property, call it. Hakitzer, in short, territoria here, territoria here, the territoriat, as so long, that's not a common verb, by the way, is mehebt on Schissen von Bixen and Harmaten. Harmaten are cannons. Und Menschen keulen sich, eins das andere, wie die Schaf. Und Blut gießt sich, also wie Wasser. Questions?
All right, I see David. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just have a very quick question. The verb, the word above, mischten.
Mischtens gesagt.
Gesagt, yeah. When I read it myself first time, I thought immediately of the German word mindestens. I assumed this was a sort of a version or deformation, whatever you want to call it, of that. Was that a possible? Yeah.
It's possible, but I don't think so.
No.
There is
Okay.
Minstens, which he could have used, but mischtens gesagt together is an idiom, meaning as it were.
Okay.
So it's referring to, he says, Stickel Breut, mischtens gesagt. And Stickel Breut is using a small thing to refer to the large thing, the parnassus. So that's why he's adding mischtens gesagt, as it were.
Okay, thanks a lot. That dispels that brief illusion.
Yeah. Folk etymology is a lot of fun, but not always accurate.
I think it's nun verstehens, verstehens gesagt.
I don't think so, but it's possible. Again, I looked up, but there's been a discussion about that among linguists, and they're not sure.
All right, so let's go to Leslie for the next question.
Yes, I'm just curious about how you figure out something's from the Talmud. You mentioned Sepharia. Just like, how do you go about looking something like that up?
Yeah, that's a long question. I'd rather answer it.
Sorry.
Look at this at sepharia.org. There's a search thing there. Okay. All right, let's move on. Aber als ich komme zu ze lechatchila, and sage ze lechatchila, from the outset. It's another Talmudic term. Lechatchila means before the fact, as opposed to b'diavad, meaning after the fact. Als ich komme zu ze lechatchila, and sage ze shat briderlich. Here's that other word that has only the imperative. Shat briderlich, los daich dienen. Let me help you. In was geht da bei euch eigentlich der ganze Sichsach? Me versteht denn nicht euer Meint? Ihr meint nicht also der Haggadah wie die Knedlach. Great expression. A guest comes and he's not so interested in the ritual of the Seder. He wants the food. So you countries that are wrangling over a piece of land, you're not actually talking about the land. You're worrying about the Knedlach. You're worrying about the income. Ihr meint nicht also die Haggadah wie die Knedlach. Territorie ist doch bei euch nur ein Äußere, a pretext. Der Iker ist doch bei euch jene Meise. Jene Meise can mean cancer, but here it means that thing, money, petimeti. Petimeti means cash in hand. And I'm not sure where it comes from. My guess is that it might come from French. It sounds French, doesn't it? Petit métier, small measure. I'm not sure. Kontributia. Und wie war Loschen Kontributia? Zu wem kommt man an? Mit der Halvoa? Zu mir, zu Rothschilden heißt es. Amer, weißt du was? Na, dir Engländer mit die lange Fies und mit die kesseldicke Häusen. Kesseldicke Häusen. what's that? A checkered, yeah, with checkered, making fun of how the English dress. Nadir a milliard. A milliard is a billion. Says 1000 million, milliard, billion. Nadir narischer Terk. Mit der Reuter Jamolka. A milliard. Nadir Mumarezel. Aunt Rose. That's Russia. We talk about Mother Russia. Well, here it's Mumarezel. Nadir euch a milliard. Moneshach. It's pronounced moneshach because it became such a popular word. It's a Talmudic expression, and it means it makes no difference. Either way, you get the same answer. Moneshach. So, nadir euch a milliard. Moneshach. Gott wird euch helfen, wird ihr mit mir abzahlen mit Prozent. Nicht Chalila kein größten Prozent, 4 oder 5 Lashana. It's not a very big percent. Maybe in those days, 4 or 5% per year. Ich will auf euch nicht reich werden. I found a map of the various fault lines. The Ottoman Empire was at odds, of course, with the Russian Empire. That's the Turkish War, the Austria-Hungary. This is a map from I don't remember exactly when, but there were continual wars throughout not only all of Europe, but also this part of Europe. So I'm going to keep going to make sure I don't run out of time. Versteht ihr schon? Ich hab gemacht ein Geschäft. Menschen hören auf. Zu keulen eins das andere. Wie die Ochsen. Umsist und nicht. Und wie bald eus Mohammes heint, zu was bedarf man das Klesaien? Klesaien, weaponry. Mit dem Chayel, soldiery. Mit alle 17 Sachen. I don't know why 17. Mit dem ganzen Tararam. Auf Tische 90 Kapores. So af kaporis means, it's an expression which means literally for the sake of the kapora ceremony, but figuratively, af kaporis means it's worthless. You can just throw it away. And why Tisha Neinsik? Tisha, of course, Hebraic, Neinsik being Germanic. 99 kaporis. You'll also see af simsot kaporis. Simsot is Slavic for 700. Af simsot kaporis. Und wie bald ois Klesaien, ois Chayel, ois Tarara, ist doch ois Sina, ois Kina, ois Terk, ois Holländer, ois Französ, ois Zigeuner, ois Yid, lahavdil. Notice again the use of lahavdil. He's putting in the same breath things that are not comparable. He can certainly compare the Engländer and the Französ and the Zigeuner, but when it comes to the Yid, that's lahavdil. Die ganze Welt bekommt Gor demmelt ein anderer Panim. Wie in Pasuk steht bei uns, geschrieben, und es wird sein, bei Yom Ahu, das heißt, als Mashiach wird kommen. It'll happen when? On that day, well, when the Messiah comes. Stellt sich up. So I'm going to keep going till I make sure I finish here. He pauses. Und efshara, Ven ikh bin Roytshild, kann sein, als ich bin gor mevatel das Geld. Another paraphrase. Ich bin mevatel. I nullify the concept of das Geld. Als Geld. Warum lassen wir sich nicht narren? Was ist denn Geld? Geld ist doch eigentlich nur ein Heskem. You hear about fiat currency? Well, it's just a Heskem, it's just an agreement. Eine eingerettete Sache. Man hat genommen ein Stückel Papier, hat weggestellt eine Zatzke und dann geschrieben, 3 rublia cerebrum. And here it is. 3 rublia. This one isn't cerebrum. Cerebrum means silver. 3 silver rubles. Geld, sage ich euch, ist nicht mehr wie ein Yetzirara, ein Teive, ein solcher. Eine von die größten Teives, was alle willen das, und keiner hat das nicht. Aber, als es soll lechaluten gar nicht sein, kein Schum Geld auf der Welt. Notice the use of Schum. Kein Geld, but kein Schum Geld, any sort of Geld. This is an intensifier, and you'll often see it used with kein. Es soll nicht sein, kein Schum Geld auf der Welt. Wollte doch der Yetzirara nicht gehabt, was zu tun. Und die Teive wollte nicht gewinnen, kein Teive. Ihr versteht? Sinne. Now you'll notice, by the way, that Sholem Aleichem is making fun of this character, putting all the words in the character's mouth, but coming up with completely unreasonable solutions that would never work. But that's part of the humor here. Let me just check my own notes here. Yeah, I wanted to point out the word heint. Where was that here? well, I don't see it right now. The word heint doesn't always mean today. Heint can also mean after all. And that's how it was used in, I didn't mark where it was. Okay. I was is doch die Kasche. Now, a kasha, there are various words for a question. There's frage or frag. There's kasha, and there's suddenly I can't think of the third word. Different kinds of kasha of questions. A kasha is a question you ask a rabbi. Is doch die Kasche, and it's a hard question. Wie wollten demol nehmen jeden auf Shabbos? So if there's no money, how are you going to get money getting ready for Shabbos? Vertracht sich auf a viola. Is there teretz? So the answer to a kasha is a teretz. And my father, I think not only my father, would answer after the 4 questions at the Seder. Instead of starting with avodim hayinu, he'd start by saying, is there teretz? Avodim hayinu. Because we have the 4 kashas, you need the teretz. The answer is lamai. Wo will ich jetzt der nehmen auf Shabbos? I'm not quite sure how lamai fits in there. Lamai means how come. Wo will ich jetzt der nehmen auf Shabbos? Because the whole thing was brought on by his wife asking for preparations for Shabbos. So here's what he's hoping it will look like. And let me acknowledge here, the translation I'm using I found online. The Yiddish text, I did the editing. And as an extra added attraction, I want to go all the way to the beginning. And now you'll hear at least 1 minute of the author himself reading the very beginning of it, not quite in the same words, but you'll hear it. This is Sholem Aleichem's own recording.
Ven ikh bin Rothschild. A monologue in Sholem Aleichem. Ven ikh bin Rothschild. I bin ich soll sein Rothschild. Erstens wollte sich gegeben mein Jidene Adreil, als Kind für Shabbos, soll sie hoben bei sich in Keschen ja Adreil, es soll mir nicht ins Podek. Und zweitens, sicher gestieft, wollte sich ja weggekippt den ganzen mit der Kammer, mit dem Kehler, mit dem Stall, mit dem Stellachle, mit dem Tijarni, mit Ackelbacken, mit dem Fleck. Sich wollte ich übergelassen nur ein Kehler auf die Knell, und die Siderike wollte ich weggegeben hier mit der Kirche, Nadje, Backbier, Kochbier, Brutbier, Brennbier, und all das schwarze Jürgen.
Oh, he's, as you can hear, he's adding words, changing it. Well, he's an actor will do that. Often you'll find recordings of Sholem Aleichem's work, not by Sholem Aleichem himself, but recordings of other people, and they'll often change things around, add words, skip parts, because they're trying to make it live and lively. All right, we've got 1 minute, 2 minutes left for final questions.
All right, so I see Rachel. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, this expression. Sorry, it's my computer. This expression, 99 kapores. I've heard from my parents a similar expression. Ich darf das sagen auf 10 schöne, reine, gute kapores. My question to you is, 99 kapores, is this a common expression? Because this is the first time I see it.
Yeah, it's always with a number. It's always with a random number. Mit 17 kapores, mit 10 kapores, mit 99 or tisha 90, mit 700. I don't know why any particular number, but it's often with a number. It's to emphasize it. Ich darf das auf kapores, ich darf das auf 10 kapores. It sounds a little bit stronger. Right, one more question.
Yep, let's go to Elaine.
Hi, can you just translate again, nicht do gedacht?
Yeah, it's a mellow fugitive. It's nicht do gedacht means it shouldn't be thought of here. And there are many versions of that. Nicht war kein jeden gedacht, nicht auf der gedacht. Usually they use the word gedacht, and gedacht has mostly fallen out of the language, except in this fixed expression or set of fixed expressions. in dachten, we don't talk about dachten. We do say es dacht sich mir. It seems to me, but otherwise we don't use it much. So, nicht da gedacht. It shouldn't happen here, or we shouldn't have to think about it here, or it shouldn't come to mind here.
Thank you.
Well, I see there are more questions, and feel free to email them to somewhere, and maybe we'll send them to YIVO, and maybe YIVO will forward them to me. So thank you for attending. Glad to have.
Yeah, I'll put YIVO's email in the chat, info@yivo.org, and feel free to send your questions there. We would be happy to forward them.
Absolutely. I would just like to say thank you again, Refoyl. And an angel notified Sholem Aleichem. He was in the audience.
I hope he didn't mind all my mistakes.
He didn't make any. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Danke.
Großen
Dank.
Schönem Dank.
A großem Schäm, nicht der Dank, nicht der schönen Dank, aber a großem schönen Dank.
Schönem großen Dank.
Ja, danke.
Die Menschen also wie ihr sind.
Eine einzige Gedanke.
Very good.
I just wanted to say I learned one thing. I have called it Moshe, like the name Moshe. Moshe Zakanim. I never knew there was a vase at the end of that word.
Moshe is something else. No, it's something else.
Moshe. We always said Moshe Zakanim. Moshe Zakanim. So I just learned something. Say it correctly. Thank you.
Same word as Moshav in Israel. There are Moshavim.
Settled.
All right, goodbye.
Ich gewollt sagen, als Yiddish lebt.
Yeah.
I hope you live.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't mute us.
All right, well, I'm going to close the Zoom room. Thank you everyone for joining. Again, I'm going to put YIVO's email in the chat, and you can feel free to email us with any questions at all, as well as questions for Refoyl, and we'd be happy to forward them. So thank you.
Why don't we end with a song like Tumbala Laika or something?
Did you put the Refoyl's resource link in the chat? I missed it somewhere.
So let me just grab that for you, and before we end, I'll put.
I lost the chat. I don't have it. I don't see the icon down on the bottom of my screen.
It just popped up for you.
Oh, I see.
Julia, are the chats saved when we go to watch this again? Because we can see this again, right?
So we are not going to be sharing because of the interactive nature. We generally don't share these types of programs with the public. We can certainly have a conversation about that with Refoyl, but generally we don't share these types of the recordings of these programs with the public. But if you have any questions about the chat and would like to receive the chat again, I can certainly send.
Can I ask? There are two links in the chat now. Which one are we talking about?
I believe the resource one. So the third link that I sent. There's.
Now you just sent two.
So the second one, that one is the link to the
UKY.ed. Oh, they're both UKY.edu.
Yeah, so the second one is the link to the reading that we did. Then the other two are just for additional resources.
Okay. All right.
Could you show people how to copy the whole chat if they want to keep it?
Yes. How do you do that? Okay, so there should be at the bottom. There should be, do you see the chat on the right side of your screen?
Mm-hmm.
you should see at the bottom of that, so like under the box where you would write a message in the chat, you should see there's like three little dots. Little, does everyone see what I'm talking about?
More?
Yes, so you click more and then you'll see save chat at the top.
Not on mine.
But also,
Chat
if you can't find it,
there's record, but I don't see save.
right, so if you can't find it, send us an email at info@yivo.org and we'd be happy to send you the chat too.
Mine, the three dots are at the top of the chat, not at the bottom. It's a little different on every system.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone. I will go ahead and close the room. But again, any questions, please email us at info@yivo.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Wir sind da, Dankoff.